maths is not scary. I think a lot of people go, I'm afraid of maths, and do I have to do maths if I'm interested in a STEM subject? I think in a lot of ecology, we use statistics a lot, and statistics is a strange branch of maths because it's more like storytelling than maths. So if you think about statistics as storytelling and think about the stories you want to tell using maths, then it becomes a little bit less scary. So yeah, it's just numbers, but you can use them to illustrate really good points, and I think it's kind of cool in a geeky way.
My guest this week is Joanna Bagniewska. Joanna is a zoologist and a science communicator. She has a bachelor's in biology from Jacobs University in Bremen, a master's in biology from Oxford University, and a doctor's of philosophy in zoology, also from Oxford University. Currently, she is a senior lecturer in environmental sciences at Brunel University, London. She does the communications and public engagement for the paediatrics department at Oxford University, and she is also the author of the brilliant book you can see over my shoulder, The Modern Bestiary. Joanna, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thanks for inviting me.
Can we just start off with your role as a senior lecturer in environmental sciences? What does that involve?
So environmental sciences is a whole group of disciplines which are to do with the world we live in. So I'm specializing in ecology, but some of my colleagues are chemists, some are toxicologists, some are geologists, and together we look at, if this doesn't sound too grand, how to make the world a better place. So how to make the air cleaner, how to make the water of higher quality, how to prevent pollution from spreading, etc., etc. So it's tackling the problems that the world currently faces.
And I have interviewed an ecologist before, but just as a recap for everybody, what is ecology?
Ecology is the relationship between different organisms in nature. So I specialize in behavioral ecology, so that's looking at animal behavior in the context of their natural environment. So as opposed to someone who studies animal behavior in the lab, for instance, or as opposed to someone who only looks at interactions between one type of plant and another type of plant, that could be an ecologist as well. So a behavioral ecologist normally looks at how animals behave in the wild.
And from our messages, I understand that you're just recently back from a trip where you were studying wolves. Are you able to say a bit about what was involved in that? It's not a secret project, is it?
No, not at all. So I've taken my students to the south of Poland, to the Carpathian Mountains, the Beskid-Żywiecki Mountains. And it's a wonderful site where you have three large carnivores. So you've got wolves, you've got lynx, and you've got brown bears. And because it's a very mountainous terrain and very forested, it's a wonderful place to actually track these animals. So we were incredibly lucky to hear wolves, to see the tracks of wolves and lynx, to actually follow a colored lynx and be able to find a kill site. So we found a very neatly half-eaten roe deer. And we also looked inside a bear's den. So it was unused, so we didn't disturb any bears, but actually we were able to go inside a bear's den. It's not very comfortable, I must say.
And that sounds quite incredible, getting to travel to different places to study these animals. Where else have you been lucky enough to travel to study animals?
So I'm a bit of a globetrotter, starting maybe chronologically. So I did my bachelor's in Germany, but because the biology I studied was very lab-based, and I thought, I'm not really that much into lab stuff, I wanted to expand what I study a little bit. So I went and did an internship in Australia doing road ecology. So looking at how roads affect different species of animals. I was interested in wombats and wallabies. And spoiler alert, roads don't have a great effect on animals, believe it or not. So I've seen a lot of casualties, but also looking at a bigger picture of how the way that the landscape is fragmented by roads, how does that have an effect on different species? And I thought, this is it. I really love going outdoors, tracking animals, seeing what they do. This is just perfect. So I was not quite ready to go back into my lab in Germany. So I stalled. And I did so by going abroad for a semester. So I went to Rice University in Houston in Texas. And there they had a degree that was focused on ecology and evolutionary biology. And a lot of that was done either outdoors in different nature reserves or in the Houston Zoo. So we had some of the most incredible teachers. We had the head of the reptile department at Houston Zoo just giving us a course on reptile behavior. It was out of this world. And so yeah, there was Australia, there was Texas. And then when I was doing my master's in Oxford, a project that I've done as part of that degree was in South Africa. So I went there for a few months to look at Cape foxes and jackals and how we can measure their presence between sites. So can we know in the cheapest and easiest possible way whether there are more jackals and foxes here or somewhere else? How would you know this without camera traps or without trapping the animals and collaring them? Because this, of course, requires a lot of money, which not many people will have to spend on this sort of activity. And it also involves manpower. So this was an interesting project. Then I stayed in the UK for my PhD because I worked on American mink in Oxfordshire. And when I started working, when I started lecturing, that's when I also started taking my students on courses abroad. So I've been quite regularly to Sweden. For a few years, we would go to a field site and look at the ecology of Sweden. It's kind of like Britain, but more and better and more interesting. Also fewer people, so it's not a fair comparison. Then Iceland and again South Africa, because I had experiences there, so I was able to take my students into the field and drive them around and show them everything. And most recently Poland. So it's quite a nice life from that perspective. If you like traveling, if you like outdoors, I must say I've got the best job ever.
It does sound like a brilliant job from that perspective, getting to follow your passion and get to see all these different places in the world. I can't think of anything better than being able to combine passion with getting to travel. But a lot of the animals you mentioned there were obviously mammals and carnivorous mammals. Is that your area of specialty? And if so, at what point during your studies do you pick what area you want to focus on or specialize in?
So it's not like once you pick something, you are doomed to study it forever. I mean, I like mammals and I know quite a lot about them right now, but I don't see a problem with switching to a different taxonomic group. I did have a brief stint in a startup company when I was looking at how bees can be used to detect illegal substances, which was a super cool job. So, I mean, bees are great. What's not to love about bees? And I became more and more interested in birds over the last few years. And as I mentioned, reptiles before, they're also fantastic. So what was really interesting actually is writing my book, because there I have an overview of 100 different species, and I pick different concepts that they represent. So it can be from conservation biology or ecology or evolution or adaptations or something else. And I tried very consciously to not be too mammal centric, which would be the obvious way to go for me because this is my background. But I did push the boundaries a bit, and I did force myself to read about as many different taxonomic groups. And I realized that many zoologists don't have the opportunity or the need to do that, because they decide at some point early on that, yeah, mammals are the best thing ever, or I'm only interested in birds, or ants are really what my passion is. And they kind of stick to it. And it's not that anyone is forcing them to continue with that, but at some point you just accumulate so much knowledge and you become an expert in the area that you stick with it. Whereas really, if you take a step back and delve into other different taxa, you realize that actually maybe your choice is not the best choice. It's a good choice, but there are many other really, really awesome ones. And so I sometimes think, well, maybe if I was to do it again, I'd pick, yeah, ants or fish or amphibians, because they're so awesome. But when you specialize in one field, you just don't get to see it that much. So the long-winded answer to your question is, if you want to change at any point in your career, it's possible, absolutely.
And I'm going to link back to that, being able to move to different areas in a minute. But since you mentioned the modern bestiary, now's a great time to speak about it. Now, for younger viewers, this is not a book for you. However, for adults and teachers watching, this is a fascinating book. Absolutely loved it. 2 pages, each on 100 animals. And you'd said in the introduction that there are around 1.4 million species of animal which have been identified, and it's believed that there's still a lot more. So how did you go about picking the 100 species that you actually looked at?
It was really tough, because you look around and you find bits and pieces, and sometimes I'd go and ask colleagues who specialize, say, in sharks, and be like, okay, tell me, what's the best shark? What should I write about? I don't know much about sharks. I need to, I mean, I know something, but I don't know enough to pick among all the sharks which one's the best. And so they provide me with advice. Or, you know, the same with entomologists. Entomologists love talking about insects, so they're like, oh, you totally have to write about this. But the underlying idea for me is thinking about an animal, thinking about the story behind it. So is it, you know, what's so special about it? What does it represent? And then taking a step back, looking through the list and asking myself the question, does writing about this species spark joy? And if it does, it's a very Marie Kondo sort of approach. Does it spark joy? If yes, I can write about it. If no, maybe I'll pick another one. So that was the final selection. But there was a very long list. So it was not easy at all.
And at 100 species a book, there's the capability for another 14,000 sequels. Are you working on one of the 14,000 sequels, or are you just sticking with the one book just now?
Well, I'm actually working on a more specialist book at the moment, but I will be back doing popular science writing, so do watch this space.
And something else I noticed when I was reading the Modern Bestiary was the number of species, when I was reading about them as you approach the end of each one, where it talks about how limited they are in numbers and how close to extinction and how endangered. Out of that 100 species, a lot of them were falling into that bracket. Is conservation and endangered species, are there becoming more of those, or does it just so happen that what you were writing about fell into those categories?
So there are different factors that play into this. On one hand, yes, a lot of the species that we know of are definitely not doing well, mainly due to human activity. So it's anything from pollution to climate change to human-wildlife conflict, all of that, and their status is just getting worse and worse and worse. On the other hand, we also discover new species. And so when we discover a species, we don't know much about it. So it's classified very often as data deficient, and we always want to be a little bit cautious about that, because just the fact that we don't know that something is endangered yet doesn't mean that it's not endangered. We have to watch out. And also the animals I picked, not all of them are endangered. I've picked some common ones as well, but I didn't want to talk only about the ones that people know about. And so if they are rarer, that also is reflected in the fact that they're probably not doing that well. So they're rare for a reason.
Yeah, and that makes sense, and it did make it a lot more interesting to read about things that I'd never heard of. And as I say, adults, great book for you, and you can remove some of the things that are said about the animals to teach young people. But
Yeah, there's definitely a few chapters which are totally readable for kids, but just adults, please just read through the chapters before you read them out loud to your kids.
Yep, and as I say, it is brilliant. So highly recommend that book. But on the note of the conservation and endangered animals, it's something that a lot of pupils that I speak to and have worked with over the years, during the school year, start to form wee groups to think, how can we look after animals in our area? What is the best way that children and young people can get involved at an early age with conservation?
I'm always really happy to see when people take an interest in nature. And I think this is such an important first step because, of course, it's good to develop a relationship with nature, to be a part of it, but also there's the practical aspect of it. So I mentioned that species have different statuses. These statuses are given by the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they range from least concern, when we're not worried that a species is in any way threatened, all the way to endangered, extinct in the wild, and then extinct. So we know that because there are people like me who go out and monitor these species. So they count, they look at trends, they see if there are more or fewer of a particular population over time. But it's a huge job. And this is something where all of you can help. So there are many apps that will be useful for monitoring any species sightings. So you can, some will help you identify stuff like plant.net. Some, like the Mammal Mapper from the Mammal Society, will ask you to just go for a walk. And if you see any mammals, please jot them down on your phone. It's as simple as that. Or there are campaigns like the Garden Birdwatch, which happens in January, February, around that time, and it's organized by the RSPB. So please do take part in these sorts of activities. It's usually just a short thing. It's a lot of fun because you get to look around, recognize new species, and it's kind of cool in a Pokemon collecting sort of way. But it's really, really useful because it helps the data that you input into these apps will be then collated and will be used for feeding projects on conserving these species. So it's really important to do that. If you're not really very outdoorsy, but you still like animals, there's a website called Zooniverse. And there you can take part in citizen science. So you will actually help scientists analyze their data. There would be a lot of camera trapping data from people who put up camera traps in different areas of the world. And the number of photos that they get goes into hundreds of thousands. And going through these photos is a huge job. So if somebody can help with flicking through the photos and saying, this is more like a tiger, and this is more like a deer, and this is more like a monkey, then that is an incredibly useful thing as well. So the website is Zooniverse. It's really helpful, not just for zoologists, there are other projects as well. And then finally, and people don't like to hear that, but on a global level, we should just buy fewer things, waste fewer things. If you get yourself a new item of clothing, maybe think, do I really need it? Can I get it secondhand? Just try to not buy as many bits and pieces as possible, because all these bits and pieces have to be produced and all of them have to be disposed somehow, and they'll probably just end up in a tip if you're bored of it sooner or later, which means that either they'll pollute the soil or some animal will eat them, and it's just not good news. So if you can reduce what you buy, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, and lots of great advice in there for getting involved, and you've got the citizen science projects to be involved in research, but also just being environmentally conscious. And we led into that question with me saying about pupils that I've worked with. So since we're talking about young people, where did your interest in STEM come from when you were younger?
I just really liked animals. When I was 5 or 6, I got this big illustrated book on animals, and it was my favorite book. It was the best book ever. And I was just reading it all the time. I was a bit of an animal nerd. And my parents, when they wanted to get me a soft toy for my 6th birthday, and they were asking what sort of a plush animal I'd like, hoping that I would say like a teddy or a bunny or a kitten. And I told them, well, I'm debating whether it should be the North American porcupine or the wombat. And they're like, oh, we can't get that. I think I got some teddy or something. That was a little bit disappointing. But yeah, I was always interested, particularly in mammals, but in other animals as well, in a kind of nerdy way. And I liked working with animals, so I always I did a lot of work at the local animal shelter just to get an idea of animal behavior. So that was volunteering work, obviously. And I helped with bird ringing as well. And I knew on some level that this is something I would want to do in the future. So it's not really a strong interest in STEM as such, but a very strong interest in animals. And I think the fact that I do like maths did help as well.
Yeah. And all of that led you obviously into STEM, even though, you know, back at 5 or 6, you weren't thinking of STEM at the time, but that interest has obviously led you in that route. And that's good for children and young people watching this who are also interested in animals to know that, you know, there's ways to get into it. You mentioned volunteering at shelters and different things. So that's all good to know. Did you have any STEM heroes as you were going through your studies?
I mean, I think like absolutely everyone in the UK, I've been raised on David Attenborough movies. When I look at application essays for university degrees, he pops up so many times. And yeah, early on it was Jane Goodall as well. But these days, I look up to my senior colleagues, and I pay attention to something a little bit different. So a person I admire a lot is Professor Amy Dickman. She is the head of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit. She's a lion researcher. And a lot of her work focuses on a very controversial topic, which is trophy hunting. And it's a topic that often attracts a lot of media attention, a lot of attention on social media, which is understandable. But Amy is always incredibly polite and very patient when discussing it with people, when explaining her viewpoint. And I think this is very admirable. So to be focused on a cause, but equally to notice the humanity in people, regardless of where they come from, and just to be respectful to everyone. I think that's so important.
And that's great there that you're saying about the importance of how she communicates with people, because obviously she, as you said, it's a controversial topic, but it's in the communication. So that's a good time to come round to what you do with the communications and public engagement for the paediatrics department at Oxford University. Now, obviously, paediatrics is not zoology, so I take it.
Small mammals, small mammals.
But I take it then,
You're in there.
your background in biology gives you that ability to branch out into different areas.
Yes. So this is it's a very interesting job because, as you said, it's a bit outside of my area of expertise. But here, my role is to take science that is produced by the researchers in pediatrics and to explain it to a wider audience. And I like the fact that I can use my science background to understand some of the science, but because I'm not a specialist, when I talk to my colleagues who have done the research and I say, look, I can't understand it, and I've got a PhD in a science subject, so if you can't explain it to me, I'm sorry, we'll have to start again. Whereas, maybe I wouldn't have that same credibility if my background was in journalism or something else. So it's very nice to be able to bridge this gap, and it's fascinating to learn about the research that's going on. But we also do public engagement project where we talk to different community groups about various research projects. We talk to children, we talk to adults, we talk to senior citizens. It's all about figuring out what it is that you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it. So who is your audience? How will they engage? What is it that you want them to do? And then you figure out how to do it.
It sounds like you have such a varied career between what you do with the zoology and everywhere you get to go studying those animals, and then the public engagement, getting to work with different scientists from a different area from yourself and communicate that out to the public. You've got so much amazing stuff going on, and it's been brilliant talking to you, and it's unfortunate that we need to try and bring it to an end just now. So can I just ask, what advice would you give for children and young people out there that are watching this that already think that they want to work with animals in the future?
I think the best advice is to go and get some practical experience. And I don't mean a very structured job working in a zoo or something. What I mean is joining a local wildlife group, figuring out if there's a local chapter of the Mammal Society or an ornithological society or an insect group or something like that. A lot of these groups are able to provide you with very practical skills. So a lot of them organize training sessions on, say, learning how to do bird ringing or learning how to do bat surveying. And these are very, very useful if you want to demonstrate, say in a university application, or if you want to go and try to get a job as an ecological consultant, that you already know what you're doing, because you'll be so far ahead. So that would be my main bit of advice. Another bit of advice is maths is not scary. I think a lot of people go, I'm afraid of maths, and do I have to do maths if I'm interested in a STEM subject? I think in a lot of ecology, we use statistics a lot. And statistics is a strange branch of maths because it's more like storytelling than maths. So if you think about statistics as storytelling and think about the stories you want to tell using maths, then it becomes a little bit less scary. So yeah, it's just numbers, but you can use them to illustrate really good points, and I think it's kind of cool in a geeky way.
And that is some terrific advice and a wee bit of research there for people to find out where their local animal groups are or the nearest group to them to go and join them. Joanna, it has been absolutely fascinating talking to you. I have loved it, and I hope everyone watching has been as enthralled with what you're saying as I have been. Just to finish up, where can people find you online and on social media to keep up to date with what you're doing, whether that's publications or your other public engagement work?
Twitter and LinkedIn would be the best ones. I've got a website as well, which is joannabagniewska.com. So if you want to get in touch, there's a little contact box there. So I do respond to these messages.